Was René Descartes a philosopher or a scientist? Well, I will actually say both. In the last episode we discussed Le Monde, or The World, which certainly was a scientific piece. The distinction between philosophy and science wasn't really clear before. If someone was a scientist, he was usually well versed in philosophy as well. And this is sometimes why I see Descartes as more of a scientist. It's just that he had to delve really deep into philosophy and especially epistemology to give his own science a firm ground to stand upon.
And this clearly was the goal with his book Discourse on Method. He wanted to show people the ultimate method for arriving at truth within the sciences. Here he writes, "For I have already reaped such a harvest from this method that, although in the assessment I make of myself, I try always to lean towards caution rather than to presumption, and although, looking at the various activities and enterprises of mankind with the eye of a philosopher, there is hardly one which does not seem to me vain and useless, I nevertheless feel extreme satisfaction at the progress which I think I have already made in the search for truth, and conceive such hopes for the future that if, among the activities of men as mere men, there is one which is thoroughly good and important, I dare to believe that it is the activity I have chosen."
Descartes realized that he had been fed with untrue assumptions throughout his whole life. And how is one supposed to gain truth within the sciences with untrue assumptions? That is like building an 80-story building upon a swamp. If one wants to gain true knowledge, one needs a sturdy, rocky foundation. Here he writes,
"The first was never to accept anything as true that I did not know to be evidently so. That is to say, carefully to avoid precipitancy and prejudice, and to include in judgments nothing more than what presented itself so clearly and so distinctly to my mind that I might have no occasion to place it in doubt. The second, to divide each of the difficulties that I was examining into as many parts as might be possible and necessary in order best to solve it. The third, to conduct my thoughts in an orderly way, beginning with the simplest objects and the easiest to know, in order to climb gradually, as by degrees, as far as the knowledge of the most complex, and even supposing some order among these objects which do not precede each other naturally. And the last, everywhere to make such complete enumerations and such general reviews that I would be sure to have omitted nothing."
So here he deployed his famous systematic doubt. He wanted to imitate the skeptics, but he didn't like the skeptics because they only doubted for doubt's sake, only to come to the conclusion that they didn't know anything. But Descartes wanted to find this solid rock where he could lay down his foundation for all knowledge. Descartes began his doubting, and he began with the senses. For instance, when you dip a stick into water, it looks bent. Maybe it is like that all the time. How can we know that our senses is not fooling us all the time? At least it is possible to doubt our senses. And Descartes had met men who made simple mistakes, even analyzing simple geometrical truths. And then it's even possible to doubt logic and reason itself, which seems self-evident. But I guess it's possible to doubt it. And René realized that you can even doubt the very thoughts that are in our heads, because they could come to you while you're asleep, dreaming. So it seems that we can doubt everything in the world, right? Or can we?
But immediately afterwards, I became aware that, while I decided thus to think that everything was false, it followed necessarily that I who thought thus must be something. And observing that this truth, I think, therefore I am, was so certain and so evident that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics were not capable of shaking it. I judged that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy I was seeking.
Even though Descartes is probably one of the most bashed philosophers in modern times, I still think that this is pretty genius. Because you can doubt the whole existence of the universe, but you cannot doubt that there is something that performs the doubting itself. So this certainly is the solid rock that René was looking for.
The problem is that what he has actually proven is a principle of solipsism. You can doubt everything except for the existence of the thinking thing. Then that simply leaves us with the knowledge that I, this thinking thing, is the only thing that exists. The forest, other people, even the entire universe doesn't exist since I can doubt their existence. But I can't doubt my own existence. Therefore, I is the only thing that exists. But this simply will not do.
We need something that can guarantee the existence of everything else. But what could possibly do that? Well, of course, you guessed it. Here comes God into the equation. We need God to escape this black hole of solipsism. So here comes Descartes' first proof of God's existence.
Following this, reflecting on the fact that I had doubts and that consequently my being was not completely perfect, for I saw clearly that it was a greater perfection to know than to doubt. I decided to inquire whence I had learned to think of something more perfect than myself, and I clearly recognized that this must have been from some nature which was in fact more perfect.
And of course, you guessed it. The most perfect being is, of course, God himself. And so here we have proved God's existence. And of course, knowledge being a higher perfection than doubt, then God would never intentionally fool us. So everything that we can perceive distinctly and clearly can be considered true knowledge. Interestingly, Descartes actually evades the famous Gettier problem. Descartes' theory of knowledge is what is called an infallible theory of knowledge, because everything that we can perceive clearly and distinctly is always considered knowledge guaranteed by God.
I held namely, that the things we grasp very clearly and very distinctly are all true, is assured only because God is or exists, and because he is a perfect being, and because everything that is in us comes from him, whence it follows that our ideas and notions, being real things and coming from God, in so far as they are clear and distinct, cannot to this extent be other than true.
So here Descartes have laid down the foundation for all science. I think, therefore I am. And God, being the most perfect being, would never fool us. So everything that can be perceived distinctly and clearly is necessarily true. In the next episode, we'll talk about the meditations. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Until that one, take care.